I'm a 28-year-old man, and I haven't spoken to my father in 6 years. His name is Mark, and he raised me alone in a small town just outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, after my mother left when I was 5. Growing up, I believed she was a selfish person who abandoned us and never looked back. That's how he explained it whenever I asked, just those words, selfish person. No photos, no phone number, not even a full name. All I knew was that my mother had been a nurse, always exhausted, always coming home in scrubs with that distinct hospital smell and a short temper. He wasn't physically abusive, but he was never really present either. He would say things like, "You're lucky I even come home at all, and don't ask for more than I can give." So, I stopped asking. I figured out early on that I had to handle things on my own. He never taught me how to cook, drive, or manage finances. I learned most of that by watching YouTube videos or asking friends at school. School was the one place I actually enjoyed being. I liked the structure, the rules, the routine. I liked knowing what was expected of me. Science, in particular, fascinated me. There was an environmental science unit in 8th grade that hooked me. I even stayed after class to clean up beakers and ask more questions. But when I expressed interest in pursuing anything related to that, Mark shut it down fast. He didn't let me join any after-school activities, claiming they were a waste of time and money. I remember crying in the hallway once when the robotics club list went up, and my name wasn't on it. I had signed up, but the teacher later told me someone had called and removed my name. I already knew who it was. By high school, Mark was pushing me towards something practical. He wanted me to enroll in a certified nursing assistant program that the school offered in partnership with a local hospital. He insisted that college was a scam and that student loans would ruin my life. He said nursing assistants made decent money. When I told him I wanted to pursue environmental engineering, he laughed, not just a small laugh, but a full-on laugh as if I had told a joke. Then he said, "You're not smart enough for that kind of career. Don't set yourself up to fail." So, I took the nursing assistant classes. I graduated, and he used his connections to get me a job at the same hospital where he worked. I didn't even get a say in it. The offer letter was on the kitchen table one morning. He made it sound like a huge favor, like he had pulled strings for me. I said thank you, not knowing what else to do. He told me to stay at home to save money, but he charged me $900 a month in rent. Groceries were split 50-50ths, and household items like paper towels and light bulbs were my responsibility too. Later, I found out he had refinanced the house and maxed out 2 credit cards. I wasn't helping with the bills, I was bailing him out. The only reason I didn't lose my mind was because of Mia. We had been friends since sophomore year. She was the kind of person who could spot when someone was drowning, even when they weren't making a sound. She kept telling me I was wasting my potential, that I was more than just a guy in scrubs changing bedpans. I didn't believe her at first, but then she started sneaking me printouts of community college classes. One day, she handed me a night class schedule with 3 words underlined: "You can start here." I enrolled without telling anyone, just one class, Introduction to Environmental Systems, paid out of pocket. I went straight from my shift at the hospital to a night campus across town. It was exhausting, but for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. When Mark found out, he went nuclear. He called me ungrateful, disloyal, and reckless. He said I was a failure and that I'd never survive on my own. When I refused to quit, he kicked me out. I was 22 when I moved into a tiny apartment with Mia. The place had water stains on the ceiling, and the oven barely worked, but it was mine. I kept working full-time and continued taking classes, slowly, a couple at a time. I learned how to budget, how to fix a broken garbage disposal, and how to survive on 4 hours of sleep while still showing up for both school and work. Mark cut me off completely, no birthday texts, no calls, not even a card. When I graduated with my associate's degree, he told people I had chosen my path. I guess I had. I transferred to a university 2 years later and finished my degree in environmental engineering at 26. I took a dresser I had brought from Mark's house years ago was a treasure trove of secrets. Behind the bottom drawer, stuffed between the wood and the back panel, I found a stack of envelopes. Some were postmarked from Florida, others from Illinois, all addressed to me, but none of them had been opened. The one that struck me the hardest was a small package with a faded sticker that read Happy Sweet 16. Inside was a silver necklace shaped like a tree, but there was no card. I called Mia and asked her to come over. She didn't ask questions, she just showed up with takeout and sat down beside me. We went through every letter, every photo, and every page of every notebook in that box. One of the letters talked about how my mother, Thomasina, was learning to make furniture. Another described a road trip she took with Dan to see the Great Lakes. Every story circled back to one thing: she wanted me to know her, and I never got the chance. That night, we laid everything out on my living room floor like puzzle pieces. Mia took photos as we sorted the items by year, batching them with what I remembered. I showed her the printed email from when I was 16 and realized it was the same year Mark took my phone and told me I was grounded for sneaking out. I hadn't snuck out, but my phone disappeared for 2 months. I asked Mia if she remembered when I got that scholarship brochure in the mail that vanished before I could apply. She did. We were 17. Mark had said he threw it out because it looked fake. A pattern was forming, and it was bigger than I had thought. Mark didn't just lie, he made sure to erase every trace of her, every letter, every gift, every attempt to reach me. I grew up thinking my mother didn't care, didn't try, didn't want me, but she never stopped trying. That night, I took a marker and wrote 3 words on the box: "This is proof." Then I picked up a notepad and started writing down every year of my life, not what I remembered, but what was missing. All the gaps, all the things I was told to forget, all the pieces Mark never wanted me to have. This wasn't just about a box or a bunch of old letters, this was about an entire life that had been rewritten behind my back. I was going to find out everything he erased, every single lie, every single time he stole something from me. I was determined to uncover all of it, and then I was going to make him watch me put it back together without him. The next morning, I pulled out a legal pad and started listing every adult who might have known what was going on when I was a kid. I didn't expect to get much, most people had either moved away or were too distant to care. But I figured if my mother was really showing up year after year, someone had to notice. First, I drove to my old neighborhood. The house next to ours used to belong to an older man named Mr. Harris. His front porch always smelled like menthols and soup. I parked across the street and waited until I saw him take his trash out. He still walked with that same slow shuffle. I got out and called his name, and when he looked up, his whole face lit up. He invited me inside without hesitation. The living room hadn't changed, same lace curtains, same framed cross-stitch of the 10 Commandments above the couch. I asked if he remembered ever seeing anyone visit our house when I was little. He did. He said a woman used to park across the street around the same time every year. She never came to the door when I was outside, but she always left something in the mailbox and walked away looking miserable. She had tattoos on her arms, but she didn't look scary, just tired. He said one year he asked Mark about it, and Mark told him she was nobody important. Next, I tracked down the old-school librarian, Mr. Avery. He had retired years ago but still volunteered at the city library downtown. I found him shelving books and asked if he remembered me. He did. I told him I recently learned more about my mother and asked if he had ever seen her. He said yes, once at a middle school science fair. She showed up with a small gift bag and stood near the entrance until Mark confronted her. The teachers told him she wasn't on the approved visitor list, and she left without saying a word. Mark told the school she wasn't allowed near me due to court orders. I checked, no such orders existed. I drove straight to the post office after that and filed a mail inquiry. The clerk couldn't give me names but confirmed that years ago, someone requested that any mail from a specific sender address be marked undeliverable and returned. That address matched one of the envelopes. The manager didn't ask questions. I packed a small suitcase, booked a rental 30 minutes outside my hometown, and turned off location sharing on everything. No one, neither co-workers, old classmates, nor Mark, knew I was back. The rental was a basement unit with its own entrance and a fold-out sofa bed. The furniture was mismatched, and the heater rattled when it kicked on, but it gave me the space and silence I needed. I brought a corkboard, thumbtacks, and the manila folders I had been collecting. Everything went on the wall: letters from Thomasina, school documents, mail records. I started building a timeline, year by year. My first stop was the high school. I signed in as part of the alumni outreach program. The secretary found my name on the list and handed me a visitor badge. I asked if I could look at any non-confidential teacher notes or archived files from my time there, especially anything relating to my academic performance. She gave me a binder to flip through. There were 2 notes from my sophomore year math teacher. One said I qualified for the district-level gifted math program, but transportation was unconfirmed. Another note added later said I was pulled from the workshop due to scheduling concerns. I remembered being excited about that program. I never understood why it just disappeared. As I walked past the science wing, I ran into someone I didn't expect: Ms. Darrow, my old chemistry teacher. She was pushing a cart full of lab kits and recognized me immediately. After some small talk, she pointed at my visitor badge and said, "You were one of the brightest students your dad wouldn't let shine." She didn't mean it as a dig, she just stated it like it was a fact. After that, I went to the public library, the same small building, the same smell of old books and carpet cleaner. I asked the librarian, Mr. Eller, if they kept public scholarship listings from previous years. He led me to the back room where the community grant records were stored. He pulled out a heavy ledger from the year I graduated and flipped to the page for science scholarships. My name was listed for the local foundation's Science Advancement Grant, with an award amount of $3,000. The status was marked as declined, and a handwritten note next to it read, "Family declined on his behalf." The librarian paused and looked at me, recalling the letter arriving. He said he was surprised when it wasn't claimed. It had been a big deal for the town, first student to win it in 3 years. No one ever told me I'd even been nominated. I left the library and drove to my old street. The houses all looked smaller than I remembered. The one I grew up in looked the worst: paint peeling off the shutters, the roof patched with a blue tarp held down by bricks, the lawn overgrown, and a cracked flower pot still sitting on the porch. Mark's car was in the driveway, the same one from when I left. I didn't go to the door, I stayed across the street, snapped one photo, and left. I needed to see it, but I didn't need to be seen. Back at the rental, I taped a new piece of paper to the wall, this one titled "What He Took." I started listing everything, from letters to scholarships to science fairs. I wrote down every name of every teacher, every date of every letter, every time I remembered asking a question and getting no answer. Then I circled Mark's name in the middle of the board, connecting every item back to him with red string. That night, I called Dan. I told him I was digging into old addresses connected to Thomasina. He said there were a few places they lived when they were still moving around for work. He texted me a list, 5 addresses total. One of them caught my eye. It matched the return label from a small box I'd found hidden under the floorboard vent in my old room. Inside that box had been a carved wooden snowflake and a note written in block letters: "Happy Holidays, even if you never get this." I circled that address in red. I looked it up. It was in a town 3 hours south, near the state line. I found a mechanic shop and a small post office in the area. The return label had a zip code that matched. That was going to be my next stop. I packed the letter, the box, and a copy of the timeline, then pinned the final note from Thomasina back to the wall, right next to the corkboard full of evidence. 5 words in all caps: "Live big, make him watch." And that's exactly what I was going to do. I left before sunrise. The town Dan mentioned was almost 3 hours south, tucked just past a state highway line, surrounded by farmland and storage sheds. The roads narrowed the farther I drove. By the time I reached the address, I was a wall covered in old photos and flyers. There was a group shot from a company picnic, and there she was in the back row, arms crossed, baseball cap pulled low. The woman introduced herself as Linda and said Thomasina had worked there for a few years, only leaving when her health started to decline. She mentioned how Thomasina would always pick up extra shifts and save every dollar she had. Once, she told Linda she was putting money aside for her son's future. Linda had never met me, but she said Thomasina carried a folded-up photo of a boy with a backpack and curly hair, said it was me. Before I left, Linda handed me a broken laptop, saying Thomasina had left it in her locker when she quit and never came back for it. No one had the password, and no one felt right throwing it out. Back at the rental, I called Mia. She asked me to send photos of the laptop model, and she walked me through some steps remotely. After 2 hours of digging, she managed to unlock the hard drive. The folders were a mess, but inside one labeled LJ were several draft letters. Some were just one paragraph, while others were 3 pages long. They all started the same: "If you're reading this, I hope you got this one." One of the letters ended with a line that made my chest tighten: "I hope you know none of this was your fault." There were also spreadsheets, dozens of them. She had been tracking local colleges, comparing tuition fees, scholarship deadlines, and even average acceptance rates. She had notes in the margins, things like "ask counselor if GPA minimum changed" and "research transportation routes to campus." She had been doing everything Mark used to say was too complicated for someone like me to figure out, but he hadn't been doing any of it. She had. Before leaving town, I bought a thank you card and filled it out for Linda. I slipped a small donation inside and dropped it off at the shop with the words, "For your kindness and memory." Back at the rental, I stared at the corkboard again. Dozens of red lines connected dates, names, and moments. I added a new note to the center, just beneath where I'd circled Mark's name in capital letters: "Everything ends with him." Then I underlined it twice. I got back to the city late Sunday afternoon. The corkboard, folders, and journal stayed packed in the back seat. I didn't unload anything. I just went inside, microwaved some leftover pasta, and texted my childhood friend, Martin, to meet me for dinner later in the week. I hadn't seen him in over a year, but would always manage to keep in touch through occasional messages. We met at a quiet diner near his apartment. The place hadn't changed much: same leather booths, same crackling jukebox. We ordered sandwiches and talked about work, the usual life updates. But somewhere between the second round of fries and the check, he leaned in and asked about my dad. I told him some of it, not everything, just enough. He wasn't surprised. He said Mark always gave him an odd feeling. He remembered how I was never allowed to attend sleepovers, even when everyone else did. Martin's birthday parties always had one less person because Mark made excuses at the last minute. He recalled one time in high school when we passed by a red truck parked at the end of the school lot. A woman waved. I didn't see it, but Martin did. He said he thought it was someone's parent. Now he was almost sure it was Thomasina. After we said goodbye, I sat in my car, thinking about something that had been bothering me for a while. A few years back, I started getting strange spam calls about unpaid bills I didn't recognize. I always assumed they were scams, but the call Dan made had come through a similar unknown number. It made me wonder if maybe some of those calls had been real. The next morning, I bought a prepaid burner phone from the drugstore and used it to call Mark's landline. He still had the same number, probably had it since the house was first built. I masked my voice and pretended to be a debt collector. When he picked up, he sounded irritated. As soon as I gave a fake name and mentioned unpaid balances connected to my legal name, he snapped, "He doesn't live here anymore. I told you people to stop calling about him." He didn't even pretend not to know the name. He jumped straight into damage control, which told me exactly what I needed. I pulled my credit report that night and went line by line. Most of it looked clean, but then I saw 2 credit cards that had been opened when I was 19. I was still living at home back then. I didn't recognize the banks, and I never opened anything under those names.